let's start with this first one. So the note says, working mostly on construction and trying to define the planes of the head, and construction drawing really beautifully done. I think I'm able to get the good likeness of the model, and the underlying head structure looks really solid, and seeing you're getting a really good understanding of the Riley head. And I want to point out is something that's sometimes could be overlooked when it comes to the construction drawing, is that drawing plumb lines and doing still using these measuring techniques to get the right proportion. So let's take a look at this reference photo first. For example, let's start with the high point of the brow ridge. If I were to draw a plumb line all the way across, and you can see that there's that kind of distance between the two eyebrows. Also, another really helpful way to understand the sort of particular angle or perspective that we're looking at is just kind of drawing these construction lines that help you understand the perspective and the angle. So I think you could see that all of her facial features are sort of slightly angled, and the construct drawing here starts to be a little bit of lacking in that, right? And with that in mind, we could see that this eyebrow right here on the left side could probably be raised up a little higher. And same goes for this eye. So this is what's going to give you that very particular, I would say, mannerism or attitude of the model. It's by these sort of little twists and turn of the head and the facial features. And same goes for, I would say, even the shadow shape of her nose. So obviously, we're trying to kind of define the different planes of the nose, and it's the bridge of the nose as these different components. But overall, it still kind of has that slanted angle that we're looking at. So while we have these sort of construction lines, definitely don't overlook these bigger angles that will help you really get the likeness of the model.
Welcome to New Masters Academy, the best place to get art education online. Receive expert critiques on your projects from world-renowned artists, helping you improve faster than ever. Embark on your creative journey today at nma.art.
And then one thing is also when we think of the head as separate entities, say from the helmet, but sometimes it's also good to combine them into these big envelope shapes. And then with that in mind, I could probably see the depth of the cranium could be slightly deeper, since we're seeing a little bit more of this side, right? It's kind of like a 3/4 view. So that distance between the ear and the back of the head could probably be slightly deeper. And I think that even comes down to, even things like, say, the shape of these horns, like some of these smaller things, we could always simplify them into straight lines. And instead of looking at the sort of organic changes on the curvature of the face, these bigger straight lines are what's actually going to give you the likeness, is by, for example, measuring the distance from the forehead to the brow ridge and measuring one side against the other in terms of how much you're seeing one side. And I think measuring it's a big component in terms of getting the right perspective. Now, moving on to this profile, again, very beautifully done, especially that contour drawing of face. I think you're using your contour lines really intentionally to get that change of depth of the rise and falls and of the facial features. So in this case, let's take a look by drawing a plumb line through the high point of the ear and see where that falls on her eye socket. And you could see that it's kind of going through it, right? And so let's do the same with the drawing. And you could see that now the eye is actually above that line. So just looking at this first glance, I would say probably the placement of the ear might be a little low, and the placement of that eye socket might also be a little high. So it's about kind of this distance between the bottom of the eye and the bottom of the nose. So you see that this distance is actually not very long. But I think in here, this distance is exaggerated, this kind of changing the proportion of the model. So in this case, I would probably move down the brow ridge and the eye socket to somewhere slightly lower, and also slightly move up her ear. This is where you could see that a lot of these facial features are not just sort of isolated entities, right? So they have relationship with one another. So obviously in the construction stage, this is more apparent. But I think a lot of time, one thing that's overlooked is like the eye line in relation to the ear. So when you're drawing the eye line, I would say always draw this as either a under arch line or an over arch line to connect them with the ear. So it's really easy to, when we're kind of looking at the head from this angle, if you're looking at my face, it's basically they sort of line up in the straight line, right? But the position of the ear, they actually change in relation to the eyes. When I look up, you could see my ears actually go lower. And when I look down, my ears go higher. And same goes for these portraits. So in this case, it's about, say, at the construction stage, kind of drawing this sort of overarching line, since again, we're looking up at her and we're seeing the bottom plane. But when it comes to a profile like this, it becomes a little harder to see. But I would say in this case, we're kind of slightly looking down at the model. So we can kind of represent that eye line with this sort of underarching angle. And this is more, I think you could see, capture more of her mannerism, of her kind of tilting her head ever so slightly, looking below her. And with that in mind, when we talk about using these bigger angles and measuring the bigger proportions, you could see in the photograph, she has more of a prominent forehead, and we can try to emphasize that. And it's always good to start with, again, these sort of bigger straight angles. Her nose, with that in mind, if we follow this sort of down arching eye line, is also casting down ever so slightly. So obviously, you could see these different muscles and fat and these different structures beneath the skin. But I would say what's very rudimentary is these kind of bigger lines and angles. So my recommendation is just to go a little longer, stay a little longer at that stage of you simply measuring and comparing these different parts of the face to one another, always sort of cross-reference. Also draw plumb lines. Well, when I talk about plumb lines, is basically these sort of horizontal or vertical lines that will help you determine the relationship of the different components of the head to each other. And you can use that to really measure anything. But I think with the use of plumb lines, you'll be really able to get an accurate read of the head. A lot of time, the head is now just sort of standing upright like this. Usually when someone is relaxed, it's like at a slight angle. So I think, following that either center line or that slight tilt of the head is really important to be able to get the right attitude of your model.